Day 26 of the Ukraine conflict with no end in sight. Hello, I'm Olena Gnesm and this is The Heat. The numbers are staggering. According to the United Nations, about 3.5 million people have fled the country since the start of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. 10 million people have been displaced, with little to no reported progress in negotiations between the two sides. And in the besieged city of Mariupol, many of its 400,000 residents remain trapped with little food, water and power. Kieran McQuillan begins our report.
Well, the fate of Mariupol is fast turning into the defining story as we enter this fourth week of this Russian invasion of Ukraine. Last night, the Russians offered the city council the opportunity to surrender the city by 5 a.m. this morning. That was flatly rejected by Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister Irina Vereshchuk. Now, there have been some very grim stories coming from the city about unburied bodies lying in the streets, no food, no water, no power. But it is a very confused situation in the city as well. For example, yesterday we heard that the Azovstal steel plant, one of the largest metallurgical steel plants in all of Europe, had been completely destroyed. Today, its director said that it had been saved. And yesterday, 8,000 citizens were able to flee the city in two human corridors that were established to the east and to the west. All across Ukraine today, air raid sirens have been sounding. Last night in the capital of Kiev at 11 p.m, a huge explosion rocked the city, and our crews got their first light. A 10-story building had been pulverized by some kind of Russian missile, some sort of Russian strike. Our crews saw at least 7 bodies on the site, and Ukrainian sources are saying that they expect that death toll to rise in the coming days. Now, why strike a shopping center in the middle of the night? Well, the Russians today said that the reason they targeted it was because it was being used to reload multiple rocket launchers and to store rockets that were being used against Russian forces in the capital. And tonight, a citywide curfew has come into effect in Kiev that will last for 35 hours until 7 a.m. on Wednesday morning. For CGTN, this is Kieran McQuillan in Lviv, Western Ukraine.
Olena Gnesm is a Ukrainian tour guide and video blogger. She joined me earlier from Kyiv, where she is sheltering with her 3 young children. Olena, we're very grateful that you could join us from Kiev. You've sought shelter in a basement in a building in the city right now, and I see you have your children with you. Can you give us an idea of what life is like seeking shelter in that basement?
Hello. Well, how life is? Well, physically we are fine in Kiev. Yes, so Kiev is under the control of Ukrainian forces, and we are more or less okay. We have here heating, we have electricity, we have water, we have enough of food supply. Every day we are able to go outside and buy something. So the pharmacies, the supermarkets are open for a couple of hours a day, and like it's enough for you to buy what you need to have your to satisfy your basic needs. But at the same time, we are living under the permanent threat and the permanent danger. Yeah, this night, for example, this hypersonic missile, I guess, hit the big shopping mall in the neighborhood not far away from us. And it was very loud explosion that we heard in the basement. And this shopping mall, it burned down completely. Maybe you've seen it. And like you never know when exactly such a missile gonna hit your building, where you are hiding, because basically we call it a bomb shelter, but in fact it's just a basement. So we are like a little bit under the ground, and it's a little bit more safe than to be upstairs. But we understand that if a missile hits directly the building, we will be trapped here. So it's not like we are all the time completely safe. We are all the time under permanent threat, and it's tough. It's very stressful, and at the same time, We know what's happening to other cities in Ukraine, what happens in Mariupol. And it's so painful to watch what's happening to my sisters and brothers and children of Ukraine, because for me, all of us are now, all Ukrainians are my relatives. They are my people. So what's happening is really bad.
Now, when you go out onto the streets and you go to the stores, to supermarkets and to the pharmacy and places like this, are you able to find what you want?
We are not looking for much right now. We are in the state of war. So what I'm looking for water, for bread, for a little bit of for some milk, for something with meat like sausages or whatever. So people do not have very high expectations to find, everything in the store. But what we have is enough not to be hungry. In Kiev, it's like this right now.
Now, Olena, what about your children? I see your children are around you there. They're with you. How are they coping? I mean, this is a confined space that they are in.
Well, they're doing pretty well. They are very clever kids and very strong, and I feel really proud of them, how they cope with the situation, because none of us have ever imagined to be in such a situation. None of us was prepared for the war. Before I was even, they never had a toy gun at home because we never played aggressive games. I never wanted my children to play with tanks or soldiers or whatever. So we didn't have even toy guns. Even Taras, my son, he never had it. They understand pretty well what's going on. They hear explosions. They know why we're hiding in the basement. They know very well what's happening. And I really want them to know, to understand, to realize, and to remember what's happening, what Russia is doing to my country, to their country right now.
Your husband is not with you. He's in the military or is fighting in this conflict. When was the last time you spoke to him, and what did he tell you?
Well, he is not really the military. He's a civilian. He's a journalist. This is his profession. But on the second day after the war, he joined the civil defense units. So what does this mean? He is a civilian who volunteered to help the army. So what they do, they help right now to defend Kiev, to do some preparation for defense of Kiev. So he is not directly involved into any kind of fightings, at least yet. But yes, he was given a weapon, like a big gun. I don't know how you call it and what's the model. But he's it doesn't have even a uniform, and I don't know what exactly they are doing because they are not allowed to share this information, and I'm not asking too much because I understand this. But they are helping to prepare defense of Kiev. In case if Russians get into the city, yes, he will be involved into the fightings too, which is absolutely crazy because the last time my husband was carrying the gun in his hands was when he was a teenager at school during their civil defense lessons. And now this is what happens. So many civilians had to take the weapon to protect the city. Many others became volunteers to help the army. We all, yes, we are involved. We didn't want this war, but we just have to protect ourselves.
There are millions of Ukrainians who've already left the country. Have you tried leaving the country?
Well, I think about 3 million people left, right? Then that means about 40 other millions stay. So I'm among those millions who stay. And I'm among those very determined people or crazy people who even stay in Kiev. Because I believe half of people left Kiev, half stayed. I decided to stay, with my children here at home because this is my home and it's not me who need to leave. These are Russians who need to leave. I will tell them that this is my home and they have no right to come here.
Olena Gnesm, thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Okay, there's much to talk about. Let's get to our panel. Einar Tangen is a political and economic affairs commentator. Bogdan Nahaylo is chief editor of the Kyiv Post, and Aaron Matei hosts Pushback with Aaron Matei on the Grayzone. Thanks everyone for joining us. Aaron Matei, we just heard there from Olena Gnesm, a woman in Kyiv who has sought shelter in a basement with her children. You listened to her story there, her fears for her family, her fears for her community. One would imagine that there could not be a better time, a more urgent time for there to be some kind of ceasefire, some kind of diplomatic solution to this. But what we are seeing instead is Ukraine's leaders call for more weapons, and we are seeing NATO nations answer those calls by pouring more weapons into Ukraine. What does that tell us?
It tells us, unfortunately, that the people who are making decisions are not in touch with the civilians on the ground who are bearing the brunt of those policies. There are solutions on the table that could have avoided this entire war. Ukraine is a divided country. In a divided country, the obvious answer is to respect the wishes of everybody. And in the case of Ukraine, when it's a smaller country on the borders of a nuclear power like Russia, neutrality is the obvious answer. And that was what Russia was asking for a long time. Unfortunately, I think the U.S. led the way in rebuffing those requests from Russia, and now we have the disaster that's unfolding. But those solutions are still there on the table. The core Russian demand is for Ukraine to agree to be neutral, not join any military bloc, whether it's a Russian military bloc or a U.S.-led military bloc in the form of NATO. And that solution is still there. And hopefully, the leaders who are fueling this conflict with more weapons and more stalling will wake up and realize that the longer that they continue to refuse to negotiate seriously, the more people will die.
Aaron, there have been negotiations taking place. There have been several rounds of talks, but nothing has come of them so far.
That's right. And there was even a member of the Ukrainian delegation who was killed by his own forces on allegations of being a Russian spy. So obviously there are splits within the Ukrainian government, and the talks have gone on, but for me, it's a question of what is there to discuss. Everyone knows how this will end. Russia has made very clear it's willing to commit an illegal invasion and cause a lot of damage to achieve its objectives, which are ensuring Ukrainian neutrality and putting an end to the war in the Donbass that began 8 years ago with a U.S.-backed coup. So, yes, it's encouraging that talks are happening, but it puzzles me as to what there really is to discuss when everybody knows what the end game is.
Bogdan Nahaylo, great to have you with us. What do you make of the situation right now? I mean, we listened to Olena Gnesm there and her fears. There should be a vigorous effort, a very strenuous effort to get to some kind of negotiated solution right now. But NATO nations have not been pushing very hard for that. They have considerable diplomatic clout. They can do something, but we don't see it.
Thank you for having me on the program and to counter the kind of rubbish that I've just heard from my predecessor. Listen, NATO being responsible. Russians have invaded a sovereign nation, a member of the United Nations, and you're talking about what? They're demanding our neutrality? Who the hell are they? We are a sovereign country, right? China, did they capitulate and agree to Japanese terms in the 40s? No. China is very proud, arrogant in many ways, and it doesn't want to deal with what others tell it to do. Same with the Ukrainians. And your predecessor, who sounds like a Russian propagandist, he has to realize, and he has to take his cue from what the woman has just told you from Kiev, we are not going to be submissive. We are not going to bow to force, to brute force, to the destruction of our cities, to the killing of our people, just because a madman in the Kremlin who threatens the whole world with his nuclear menace, including China. Do you want a third world war in China? The producers of this program? I doubt it. So why do you allow a maniacal Russian who wants to be a 19th century imperialist and dictate his terms to others? Ukraine is a peaceful nation. It is our right, not China's, not Moscow's, and not these fellow travelers that you have on the program to dictate to us who we want. We want security. We don't want to be part of Eurasia as dictated by brute force from Russia. And we want to be part of NATO, yes, because with Russia, the alternative is to be a subservient, vassal state. We don't want that. We want security. We gave up our nuclear weapons in 1994, lest you forget, under international guarantees, which have not been honored, mainly because Russia wanted to expand to be a big power. Yes, you don't want to hear this. I know it's uncomfortable, but
Well,
get real.
I have limited time and I have other guests.
And regardless of what you guys think, and don't set your anti-Western, shall we say, narratives for us. We will not accept them. China has its interests. Ukraine's biggest trading partner is China.
Yeah.
Is it in the interest of China to have Ukraine destroyed and have Russian hegemony imposed? No. So don't give us this rubbish about sort of NATO. What do we have to discuss with Russia? They are killing us.
All right, Bogdan, let me
discuss with someone that's killing you.
Let me ask Aaron Matei to respond to what you've been saying. Aaron Matei, you've just been called a Russian propagandist.
Yeah, that's fine. I can take being called names, but what I won't accept is a distortion of the facts. Unfortunately, it's a sad reality, and I understand for any Ukrainian living under bombardment right now, they do have every right to resist. But we have to keep in mind some context. This war did not begin when Russia invaded. Russia's invasion was a dramatic and illegal escalation, but the war has been going on for the last 8 years, and that war began when Ukraine's sovereignty was actually initially violated, when there was a coup backed by the U.S., a new government was installed, dominated by far-right fascists who declared war on Ukraine's Russian-speaking population.
This is the Russian narrative.
Bogdan, one moment. Let Aaron finish.
We've been at war with Russia for centuries.
Bogdan, they're both of you talking. Bogdan, let Aaron finish what he was saying. Go ahead, Aaron.
Why? Why do you have a propagandist on board?
Okay.
This is the Russian narrative.
Sir, I did not interrupt you.
Okay, you have to let Aaron finish what he's saying. We have different views on the show, and allow the other guests to say what he wants to say.
Population, a Jewish, Ukrainian, Russian speaker.
Bogdan,
this propagandist, an American propagandist speaking on behalf of Russia.
Okay, Bogdan, you have to give Aaron a chance to finish what he was saying.
Get yourself a decent Russian Democrat.
You should mute the speaker. I'm sorry.
Aaron Matei, go ahead. Go ahead.
Not an American propagandist paid by Putin.
Okay, Bogdan, you're not giving the other You're not giving the other guest a chance to finish.
Yeah, and he's also inventing. He's inventing a series of claims about me, but that doesn't matter. Look, the fact is, there's been a war going on for 8 years. It's been fueled by billions of dollars worth of U.S. weapons that have treated Ukrainians as cannon fodder. Ukraine, unfortunately, as I tried to say before, is a divided country. There are many Ukrainians who feel, as this guest does, that they want to be a part of NATO and they want to be a part of the EU. I don't deny that. Unfortunately, U.S. policy has been predicated for the last 8 years on denying the rights of those millions of Ukrainians who don't want to be a part of NATO, who actually want to keep Ukraine's historical and cultural ties with Russia, who speak Russian, and whose rights have been assaulted by a government that has waged war on them. In such a situation, we have such a divided country of people with such opposite views and cultural ties. The obvious answer is neutrality. Russia has tried to impose that now in a very brutal and awful way. I wish it hadn't come to this, but unfortunately, it's been the Ukrainian government in refusing to implement the Minsk Accords, which were reached in 2015, with the backing of the U.S., that has prolonged this crisis and kept peace impossible. And now Russia has answered in its own brutal way. The only answer is to accept the obvious, which is that Ukraine is a divided country, and accept a neutral state.
All right, let's go to Beijing to Einar Tangen. Einar, China's ambassador to the United States, he spoke over the weekend to the U.S. media. He was on one of the Sunday talk shows, and he was talking about reports that Beijing was considering providing military support to Russia. Let's listen to what the ambassador had to say.
There's a disinformation about China providing military assistance to Russia. We reject that.
You won't do so.
What China is doing is send foods, medicine, sleeping bags, and baby formula, not weapons and ammunition to any party. And we are against the war, as I said. We will do everything to de-escalate the crisis. China's trusted relations with Russia is not a liability. Actually, it's an asset in the international efforts to solve the crisis in a peaceful way, And China is part of the solution. It's not part of the problem.
So, Einar, there we heard the ambassador lay out the Chinese position. And of course, we do know that President Xi Jinping and President Biden held talks last Friday on the situation in Ukraine. So what role do you think China can play at this stage?
Well, it was very interesting that the ambassador refused to criticize either the U.S. for the long-term situation, 15 years when they knew that Putin was extremely unhappy, continuing to move NATO forward, and or criticize the Russians directly for what is going on in Ukraine, which is unexcusable. So it appears that China believes that it can act in a constructive way by coming out. I mean, it's very unusual for an ambassador to appear on a talk show in the U.S. And subject himself to a lot of very hostile questions. But it was obviously in an effort to calm things down and point to perhaps a solution. And I think increasingly people see this as a council of great powers, not only the U.S. and Russia, but also all of those who are aligned or important to this process. And I think China would figure in there, India, other nations, basically bringing together the nations who can, through peer pressure, tell each side that this is a multipolar world. And at this point, it is time to put the guns away and try to figure out how to get this done while respecting the individual needs of security on each side.
Bogdan, I want to move on with this story and talk about President Zelensky's address to the Israeli parliament, the Knesset. That happened over the weekend. Let's listen to part of what President Zelensky had to say.
When the Nazis invaded Europe and wanted to destroy everything and everyone, conquer nations and leave nothing of us and you, no name and any traces, they called it the final solution of Jewish question. You remember it and will never forget it for sure. But you should hear what is coming from Moscow now, what words they are saying now. Final solution. But this time it's about us, about the Ukrainian question.
Now, Bogdan, that reference there to the Holocaust was not received very well in Israel. The Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett criticized any comparison to the Holocaust, calling such a reference forbidden. Was that a mistake by President Zelensky?
Of course it was not. This is a Holocaust of the Ukrainian people, and China is sitting on the fence. Thank God it was not one of the 4 countries that supported Russia in the General Assembly vote. Thank God, China decided to abstain from voting. Yeah, it's playing it both ways, China. Obviously it's scoring, it would like the tensions between Moscow and Washington to work in its favor, to get cheap oil at the end of the day, etc., etc. But China is wise, and it doesn't want Ukraine destroyed, and it wants the madman in the Kremlin to be put in his place. So yes, Zelensky has every right to talk about the Hitler of today, Putin, doing the same to the Ukrainians as was done by Hitler in the name of defending Germans, the German people in Czechoslovakia and elsewhere. Look, let's be honest. We have a madman. He has his finger on the nuclear button, and all of us are a threat, including China. Let's not, pretend this is about, being sort of fair. This is an asymmetrical conquest by Russia of Ukraine. Ukraine has not sent one single missile against Russia. Have you heard from Russian propaganda, even from the guy speaking here today, about one missile hitting Russia? About one bomb hitting Russia? It's all one-sided. Destruction of cities, of hospitals, of maternity wards. These are crimes. The highest court of the UN has already condemned it this week. Why aren't you talking about that? Why are you talking about the need for peace? What is peace? Peace on what terms? You go and you destroy a country, and then you ask the other side to beg for peace? Come on, get real. You're a Chinese station. Let's get real. Would China behave in this way? Come on, get real.
Okay.
Talk about
Aaron, you want to say
crime.
something
Talk
very
about
briefly, please?
humanity.
Once again, my
Talk
colleague
about
is omitting
the
the
fact
war.
that
Okay,
take
again.
position
He'll have
as
to
a
shut up.
world leader and not.
One moment, Bogdan.
Now it's my turn.
Yeah.
Once again, the guest is omitting the war that's been going on for the last 8 years. It's true, no Ukrainian missiles have hit inside Russia, but they have hit inside the Russian-speaking areas of the Donbass of the last 8 years, where 14,000 people have died. Since 2018, the majority of civilian casualties, 80%, have occurred on the Russian-speaking side of that war. That is a major factor here, and it cannot be ignored. And it's tragic to hear Nazi Germany being invoked when the Ukrainian military is the only military in the world that formally incorporates a neo-Nazi militia, the Azov Battalion, into its armed forces. Zelensky ran admirably on a peace platform. He was going to implement the Minsk Accords and bring peace to the Donbass and end this awful conflict. Instead, the neo-Nazis of Ukraine threatened him. The U.S. tacitly sided with them. And Zelensky, unfortunately, didn't stand up to either the neo-Nazis or the U.S. Now we're in this awful situation.
All right, Einar Tangen, we just heard Bogdan tell us that China is sitting on the fence right now. We just heard from the ambassador earlier on, in which he told us, look, he sees China's good relationship with Moscow, as well as its good relationship with Kyiv, as an asset.
Absolutely, it is an asset, and unfortunately, while we have inflamed passions, what you have here is the intersection of two tragedies. One long-term in terms of Russia and their security concerns, and the second is what is happening to Ukraine right now. I can understand his passion. People are literally in his backyard threatening him. But at this juncture, I do think you have to look towards peace, because if you're not looking towards peace, it's only going to be destruction.
Bogdan, President Biden is heading to Europe at the end of this week. He's going to be holding meetings with NATO leaders in Brussels. He'll be also meeting EU leaders, and then he goes to Poland for a bilateral meeting with the Polish leader there. Beyond the symbolism of such a visit, what are you expecting to come out of this?
Well, Biden has called Putin a war criminal, which is very positive. He's given Ukraine almost $1 billion more in terms of arms, which is very positive. He's rallying the West, and they are very united. Putin has united Europe like no other person, as he has united Ukraine. So what do I expect from this? I think more reinforced support for Ukraine without NATO actually going into Ukraine, but by other means, and to bring the Caligula in Moscow down. I think that his appeal will also be aimed at the Russian population, the Russian leadership, to get rid of this tyrant and to give world peace, not through Russian arms, which are totally, it seems, incompetent.
All right, Bogdan.
And the Chinese should learn from this. And I think he will rally the rest of the world.
All right, Bogdan, we have run out of time. I'm sorry to cut you off. We have run out of time. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Olena Gnesm in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.